Hi guys, so today I'm doing my first author spotlight video. I am going to be discussing Nabokov, and for anyone who doesn't know, I'll leave a link down below to the video where I introduced this series. There are 8 authors that I could discuss in these videos, so I want you guys to let me know which author you would want me to discuss next. So here are the authors that I can discuss. So you've seen all of the author names, and you can pick whichever one you want me to discuss next and vote in the comments. In about a week, I will announce who the next author spotlight video will be about, and then in 2 weeks, I hope to make another video. So because I have about 8 authors, I'm hoping to make a video about every 2 weeks. So as I said, the first author I'll be discussing is Vladimir Nabokov. I have read 5 books by Vladimir Nabokov, 4 fiction and 1 autobiography. So Vladimir Nabokov was born in 1899 in St. Petersburg. He was a very well-educated child who was very interested in learning, and he went on to study at Cambridge. He studied Slavic and Romance languages, and he also lived for a while in France and in Germany before heading to the United States in 1940. While living in the United States, he taught at various universities such as Harvard and Cornell, and then in the end he died in 1977 in Switzerland. Nabokov's earlier works were all written in Russian, but later on he started writing in English, and I think that this is what a lot of people find is amazing, is that he was able to write so beautifully in a foreign language. His earlier books is Laughter in the Dark. This was published in 1933, and it is about a man, Albinus, who is married, but he cheats on his wife, and this affair leads to the destruction of his life and really changes everything for him. And it's almost comical how everything just goes wrong. I would say that most, if not all, of the characters are dislikable in this book, and I think that despite the fact that they're dislikable, you really want to learn what happens to them, and they're quite interesting characters. They're not bland. They are pretty fully formed characters, and it's very interesting to follow their stories. I thought this was a really well-written book, and by the way, this was written in Russian and then it was translated into English. I find that while the language is very beautiful, it's nowhere near as beautiful as Lolita or Pnin, and I still enjoyed this book. I would still recommend it if you've read a lot of Nabokov's work and you want to go further on into his work, but I would not recommend this as a first book if you haven't read any Nabokov yet. In 1959, Nabokov wrote Invitation to a Beheading, and this was also written in Russian. This is about a man, Cincinnatus, who is condemned to beheading for gnostical turpitude, which is a made-up crime, and we don't actually know why he's in jail, and he is in a very absurd jail. There's a lot of strange things that happen, for example, dancing in and out of the cells. It's just a very strange novel, and a lot of really weird things happen. And this was the first Nabokov I ever read, and I picked this up because I didn't want to start off with Lolita. And I'm not sure if it was the best place to start because I was confused sometimes. There are some striking similarities to The Trial by Kafka, but Nabokov claims he hadn't read any Kafka before writing this, but it's very interesting how some of the themes are a bit similar. I find the tone of the novel is quite similar to The Trial, and I really enjoyed this, although it wasn't my favorite. The next books I read by Nabokov were all written in English, and as I said, English is not his mother tongue, and I find that the books he wrote in English have very beautiful writing. I would say the writing is a bit different than the books that were translated from Russian, which I think makes sense. So the next book I read was Lolita. This was published in 1955, and it's about Humbert, who has a strange fascination with young girls who he calls nymphets. So not all young girls are nymphets, but the girl that he meets towards the beginning of the novel, Dolores Hayes, is definitely a nymphet for Humbert. And this is a strange tale of obsession on his part about this young girl, and you see everything from Humbert's point of view, and he's a very unreliable character. And what I find really interesting about this is that I'm not quite sure what Nabokov was trying to do. What I find really interesting about this is the fact that you can tell that Humbert is a very unreliable character, but at the same time you can sympathize with him sometimes. But at the same time as you kind of sympathize with the character, you can see glimpses of reality throughout the book, which I find are incredibly fascinating to think about, because you never quite know what the story really is about. You never quite know if what you're being told is reality or if it's his perception of reality. And I found that incredibly fascinating. As many people have said, this book is incredibly beautifully written. The writing is just so beautiful. The descriptions of everything is amazing, and to me this is probably one of the most beautifully written books I've ever read. I think the subject matter can be hard for some people to grasp. I have a friend right now who's trying to read it, and she's just having a lot of trouble reading about this relationship, if you can call it that, and I understand why some people may not like this book because of the topic, and I would say that if you're not very squeamish, you should give this a try. A lot of people seem to only read Lolita when they read Nabokov's works, and I definitely say that you should not just read Lolita. If Lolita is the only book by Nabokov you read and you didn't like it, I would still say you should try some of his other books because his writing is just so beautiful, and not all of his writing deals with this kind of subject matter. The next book I read by Nabokov was published in 1957, and this is Pnin, and it was also written in English. And from what I understand, Nabokov was writing Pnin around the same time as he was writing Lolita. This is about a professor, Timothy Pnin, he's a Russian expat who lives in the United States. And he is just having a lot of trouble integrating into American culture, and he sees a lot of the differences in American culture from his native Russian culture, and he's just having a lot of trouble getting to know people, and there's a lot of really funny things that happen in this book, and at the same time it's kind of sad, but I found that this book was also really beautifully written, and there's a lot of play on words, and I thought it was really funny. And I would say if you're looking for a kind of lighthearted read for Nabokov, I would go with Pnin because it was really funny, really beautifully written. It's really short, it's only about 170 pages. So the next book I read by Nabokov was published in 1967, and this is Speak Memory. This is Nabokov's autobiography, and it looks at his childhood and his teenage years, and it really looks into his life and his family life, and I found it very interesting because you learned a lot of facts about Nabokov that you wouldn't know otherwise. So I'm just going to give you guys a couple ideas. So first, Nabokov was really fascinated with butterflies. Another interesting fact about Nabokov is that he had synesthesia, and I don't really want to explain it here because I feel like I'm going to explain it wrong, so I'll leave a link to a video that a book party made, and she discussed synesthesia. She explained what it is. I found that this book was really beautifully written like his other books, and I found it kind of very, very, very heavy to read. I think that some of Nabokov's books are a bit heavy and some are a bit lighter, but this book took me a while to get through, and it took me a while to process what I was reading. I still think it was a very enjoyable reading experience, but it is a heavier book, so take your time with it. So those were the 5 books I read by Nabokov, and I just have a couple things to say before I end this video. So the first thing is that if you go on Goodreads and you see how I rated all of these books, you'll notice that each of them got 4 stars. So I haven't given any of his books 5 stars, and that may seem a bit strange because I really love Nabokov's writing. I love his books, but I can never quite get myself to give his books 5 stars, and I think it's because I find that Nabokov's writing is a bit detached from the reader, and you don't feel fully invested in the characters the way I do when I read, for example, the Makioka Sisters by Tanizaki, where I really feel like I'm inside the heads of the characters and I really feel emotionally invested in what happens. I find that when I'm reading Nabokov, I feel like an outsider looking into someone's life, and I'm not sure if anyone else feels this way. And it doesn't actually take away from my enjoyment of his work, but it does keep me a bit at a distance when I'm reading his books, and I can never quite get as emotionally invested enough to give it a 5 star.